So continuing on that, you can see how changing a single character on it's just adding a single character really impacts the chances, pretty much the probability of cracking the password, as well as how it impacts the time it's going to be broken. Now, that is one of the reasons why it's always advised for individuals to have a really strong passwords. And yeah, so make your passwords combination really, the password length should be high, as well as we're going to look into what happens when you put in alphanumeric characters. So same thing. But in this case, we have an alphanumeric password combination, meaning that we are going to use numbers as well as use special characters in the password. When you do the same, but for 8 password length, it turns the chances of the password being cracked into at least 2 trillion for 8 password length, and then the time to crack it with the same computer specification as the other one is going to be 2.7 hours. So there's a huge difference in the alpha alpha only password. We see the time as 1.01 seconds, and by using alphanumeric, which means adding numbers and special characters, it turns the time to crack it to 2.7, all with the assumption of a computer with this specification is being used. Now, there are a lot of, like we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of tools that can be used to crack a password. Cain and Abel, John the Ripper. Another recent one is AirCrack, which has been used to break WEP and WPA. WEP and WPA are the Wi-Fi encryption algorithms that are used pretty much to secure your Wi-Fi password. They have all been broken actually. When you get the chance, you can definitely look into it as well as read about it. But yeah, with as you can see, if you're using an alphanumeric password with just a password length of 16, it's gonna take these amount of years, quite a lot of numbers. I don't even know how to read it. Let me see. That's actually 639 billion years to um, unlock it. And when yes, to pretty much crack it with with a computer with this type of specification. Now with quantum computers and qubits and all of that power, high computational power coming out and discussion, definitely the time here to crack is definitely going to decrease significantly. But this is how we decide on security and pretty much password controls. Every single password is broken, can be broken. It's just a matter of time, how long it's gonna take. Now, if you have a computer and you know that computer is pretty much alive, so there is no way you can spend good 1 hour without seeing your computer on a daily basis, which means you don't sleep or anything. Your computer is right next to you, so no one can have access to your computer and spend at least 2.7 hours. And you know that the only type of computer that is out there in the market that someone can get their hands on is has there's nothing out there with this more than this specification and this computational power. Then it is perfectly okay for you to put your password at only 8 password length alphanumeric, because you know every single hour you're going to check your computer, and there's nothing out there that is more powerful than this computer combination. Now, if you know, like, you can spend a whole day without even looking at your laptop or your computer, and you know this type of computer is the only thing outside, then maybe um, a password length of 8 is not good for you, because you can stay away from your computer for more than 2.7 hours. But then maybe 9 might be the best for you, because there's no way you can spend a whole day without getting access to your computer. I mean, lately, a lot of people are using 32 bits password length as their password. password length. So this is how we pretty much view security, password controls as it relates to security. And pretty much in general, as you are looking into controls, you realize most of the security controls can either be broken or they have their own time period that they need to be upgraded or something like that. Nothing is pretty much unbroken as it relates to security. Okay. Next, we are going to look into forces of nature. This is just threats to organizations as well as everything within the organization, their systems, their applications, the organization's functions, as it relates to pretty much forces of nature. So when you think of fire, flood, hurricane, these are pretty much forces of nature. There are controls in place to pretty much handle it, but it's really hard to control. And when I say control in this sense, I meant to manage forces of nature threat. So you can only put controls in place to minimize it. Think of fire, you can put sprinklers in your house or your organizations or your company or the building to ensure like as soon as you can put also smoke detectors to ensure that as soon as fire starts, sprinklers will kick in. Flood, you can have insurance in place. I mean, I think there are flood barriers or kind of like some architectural designs that are meant to pretty much reduce the impact of flooding. But you can have insurance in place so someone takes the entire burden and the cost of repairing it. I mean, we have flood insurance for our homes. It's a common thing. And then hurricane, similar to flood, those are those the kind of controls we can have in place. Now, in addition to that, there are definitely other ways organizations can, other things organizations can do to pretty much handle forces of nature as well as other security threats. One could be recovery sites. So if an organization have recovery sites, maybe organization A is in Washington, D.C., and then they decide to have a similar type of structure and systems and everything in place, and it may be in Atlanta. So whatever natural impact happens to site A in DC, and at least they have site A similar to site A replication of site A in Atlanta to pretty much quickly revert to minimize their downtime. Now, there are different types of recovery sites from warm, cold, and hot recovery sites. We'll cover that when we get to disaster recoveries. It's a chapter on its own, and we'll cover it in this class. Additional alternatives and controls could be having a backup in place. um, Maybe the natural disaster had an impact on all the information systems. The hard drives and everything is gone, cannot be recovered. So at least having a backup in place ensure that will ensure that the organization retrieves its information and data, and not just the forces of nature. Having backups in place is a common practice and a good practice pretty much within the realm of um, security. Always, always, always try to back up your most valuable information or pretty much any valuable information because it's easy to replace a laptop. It's harder to replace the content that it resides within the laptop. So always try to adopt um, that mindset of doing constant backups. Okay, and next we're going into human error and failures. So these are pretty much threats to organizations that tends to happen as a result of human errors. It could be due to, I mean, most of the time it's without malicious intent and it's due to ignorance. It could be due to a new hire, inexperienced hire. It could be due to lack of training. Could be making the wrong call. Could also be social engineering by revealing so much data. Just because you are very good with someone, go to the bar, having a good time, started talking about that really amazing research you're doing, but then it's proprietary and you're not meant to release it, but you're having a good time, establish a trust, and just start talking. I mean, we talk, people tend to talk to those, to people they are comfortable with. You go home, start talking, and all of that. And there are a lot of security threats in place, security issues in place that you might violate by just saying certain things. I mean, there are a lot of instances I can actually remember. So back in, I can't remember, was it 2010 or 11 or 12? Amazon had a huge issue with their it's some sort of a service disruption with their elastic load balancers. Actually, let me try and pull up the story before I make it up. But what happened is they had an issue with their elastic load balancers, and it really disrupted their service and resulted into all their customers losing pretty much their services. And Amazon is very well known to um, provide 99.99 uptime, and that's what they usually promise their clients, their customers. And as a result of the attack, they weren't able to provide that. And worst case scenario, I believe the attack happened on Christmas Eve or something. And let's quickly take a quick look. Let's quickly take a look and see. I believe the story. I can't. Let's hope I'm able to pull it up and see. Yep, this is it. So on Christmas Eve of 2012, Amazon had some issue with their load balancers. It was had an impact, is some sort of a disruption, and really affect all their customers. I believe, yeah, here they are saying it started at 12:24 p.m. and as you can see on December 24th, but as yeah, happened on December 24th, but they weren't able to bring it back till I believe, let me see, I think on Christmas Day. Yeah, 2:45. Oh, yes, at 5:40 a.m. on December 25th, that's when they were able to restore the services back up. And the disruption happened, even though it's internal, but it happened due to an employee failure, something along those lines. When you get the chance, definitely catch up on the story. It's really interesting and um, really highlighting. But the impact on this was their customers weren't getting what they wanted, even though it is Christmas Eve. If you have a website that is running on maybe ELB, like that leverage ELB services. And as a result of this disruption, it impacted your website, and maybe it's an e-commerce website, and customers cannot buy things from your website because the website is down due to this. That's an issue. And also from Amazon viewpoint, I believe I didn't really follow, but there has to be some sort of either they decide like the entire month they might not charge customers for ELB services or some sort of agreement because Amazon is well known to provide a 99.9% uptime. And when you take a look at when the disruption happened at 12:24 and then they weren't able to come back till 5:40 the following day, it means the network was down for almost 16 to 17 hours. With 720 hours in a month and 17 hours gone, that definitely is no longer 99%. It should be around 97, 98%. So that means Amazon will not be able to provide the services that they are promising to their customers. Which means if there is some sort of an agreement in place and they are not meeting, which they have to pay their customers that. Also, another one that I could remember that happened due to inexperienced as well as a new hire. Let me try and see if it's still there. This has to do, I believe I read this on Reddit, can't remember when, but it had to do with a um, new hire on his first day um, wipes completely the production database. And yeah, I believe he was fired that same day that he did that. Yep, this was the story. And when you get the chance, maybe you should catch up on it as well. Um, what was he saying? But he kind of yeah, accidentally destroyed production database on first job and was told to leave. On top of this, he was told, or he or she was told by the CTO that they need to get legal involved. So this is also, you know, part of all human errors, as you can see. So definitely, and this is really a huge issue and a main part in cybersecurity, or pretty much in security, that is really hard to manage. Yeah. All right. Next, we are going to talk more in depth on social engineering, but there are different forms of social engineering, as we mentioned earlier. Talking could be in person, could be over email. I mean, there is also a phishing where someone sends you an email with the intention of trying to gain certain confidential and personal information, or the advanced fee fraud, which for some reason a lot of it's been synonymous these days with the Nigerian prince as well as Nigerian scam, which is part of someone sends you an email and say, an example, you have $1 million in a bank account somewhere, or you have inherited whatsoever, but you need to send maybe $10,000 for you to be able to retrieve it. I mean, those are all part of scams and greed of victims. That victims' greed tends to also come into play. Now, with me being of Nigerian descent, the truth is I know that a lot of these are not really implemented. They do not originate directly from Nigeria. I believe I once read on a Microsoft blog or something like that, that there was a study that a lot of phishing attacks do not really originate from Nigeria. But you can look into that on your own and do the research. The intent here is for you to understand what social engineering is, as well as phishing. Oh. So next we are going to look into information extortion, which is also um, a common threat within security realm towards organizations. We There are different types of information extortion. One has to do with maybe sextortion, including adult pictures and things like that, where someone, especially for within highly influential people, maybe some sort of a hacker is able to break into their phone and everything, get download their pictures and say, all right, you have to pay me before, or else I'll release the pictures. There were a lot of incidents that happened. One could be one well-known had to do with iCloud, where a lot of these celebrities, their pictures were stored within iCloud, and yeah, and hackers were able to get it, and they were extorting them on that. Another one, popular one that happened is actually, well, I still have to talk about Game of Thrones. If you know me, if you've taken my network class, you know how I love Game of Thrones and I cannot shut up about it. But um, I believe Game of Thrones at some point was um, so it was stolen at some point. Certain episodes were stolen. I can't remember which season, 5 or 6, something like that. Some episodes were stolen, and the hackers kind of got in touch with HBO, and they were like, you have to pay us a certain amount of money or else we release those episodes. HBO didn't pay, and what eventually ended up happening, those episodes got on those piracy sites and they got leaked. Another one, major one that happened is the Sony hack. If you guys know of the movie The Interview, if you haven't watched it, it's really a funny movie, but it's a movie about Kim Jong Un, North Korea, and all of that, and how it is, what's going on over there, all of those things. More of like a comical representation of that. And apparently, North Korea hacked into Sony and got access to their information and all of that, and they were saying they are going to release all this information if Sony decide to pretty much air the movie. The movie, due to certain national security concerns as well as terrorism and things like that, didn't end up in the movie theaters. It's actually Netflix the movie at some point. Yeah, the premiere happened on Netflix. But these are all incidents that as it relates to blackmail. Another one these days is gaining huge popularity is the ransomware where they access pretty much the hackers access either a computer and they hijack the computer, they lock it completely, and they request for, as you can see here, they said you have to send 300 worth of Bitcoin to a certain address. And if you don't know, Bitcoin is just a type of cryptocurrency, but they are requesting for it. They give you a certain time that you must do it, or else it's not going. They are not going to release the system, or they might wipe the computer complete and everything. And if you do not have any backup, imagine spending years, doing years and years of research and not having a backup, and then losing all that information because it's been uh, hijacked by hackers. One major one that happened recently is the WannaCry. Some were saying North Korea was the one behind it, but the WannaCry ransomware attack that happened in 2017, I believe around 200,000 computers were affected. And NHS, that's the UK National Health something, I believe. Well, the S is not for something, it's the National Health Scheme, I guess. They were really, really affected because they were running Windows XP at the time, and Windows XP is no longer supported by Microsoft, so they missed a lot of security updates, and the ransomware was actually exploiting a Microsoft vulnerabilities. But it happened to a lot of computers nationwide after it was implemented. Another one is the NotPetya, which happened as well same year 2017, but it was Ukraine was targeted more. They were really affected by that. When you get the chance, definitely look into reading about those types of those attacks. Next is the sabotage or vandalism types of attack. This has to do with pretty much sabotaging company resources as well as properties and everything. Very common with defacing websites. There are a lot of organizations that are known to pretty much do a lot of sabotage and vandalism. Some of depending on how you think about it, but could be anonymous. There's another one called lulzsec. Anonymous is really well known because they have been, yeah, they Anonymous are actually really big because they have done a lot in terms of DoD department, DHS, as well as individuals, schools, and different places. They have defaced their website or implemented DDoS attacks, but they are pretty much a hacktivist organizations, a hacktivist group, completely anonymous. Nobody knows them, I guess, and obviously since they're anonymous, but they are activist group, and depending on your political viewpoint, you might agree with them or disagree with them. But yes, they do a lot of sabotage and vandalism. Also, same with LulzSec, also known to do that. I believe LulzSec once took the entire CIA website down. And then there's cyber terrorism and cyber warfare. Cyber warfare, you read into like Stucknext. There's an accusation that the US and pretty much Australia, I believe, or France, were behind Stuxnet, where they targeted Iran's nuclear program and really brought it down by just injecting a worm within the computer systems that are meant for Iran's nuclear weapons. No, Iran's nuclear program ended up pretty much setting Iran really back with the program. So these are all part of sabotage and vandalisms that happens, and it can definitely affect organizations' reputation, their net worth, their sales, their revenue, and even to a point of diminishing completely consumer confidence. Now, in addition to that, we have the software attacks. When we talk about software attacks, we're talking about attacks that pretty much are done using a software. So it includes a malicious code. So like a malware, writing a code, a script, a virus, worm, pretty much just writing a program that does something negative or detrimental. And I mentioned Stuxnet. There is the accusation was that the U.S. created Stuxnet and targeted it towards Iran nuclear program. But there are different types of malware. One is a virus, which is everybody calls pretty much all malware is virus, but actually a virus is just it's a segment that attached to an existing program or take control or access of a certain targeted program. So think of having your computer, you have maybe 100 gigs of space, and then maybe for some reason all your files that are stored and maybe a portion like 10 gig of your drive, you cannot access it, you can't do anything, the files are corrupted, you can open them on whatsoever because you pretty much are not in control of it, you can't do anything with it. That's more of a virus. Definitely running antiviruses as well as updating your antivirus systems and updating your systems tend to clean that because there are a lot of places where all new viruses like zero-day viruses are usually dumped there, and a lot of these antivirus providers usually release updates with signatures that are meant to tackle those viruses and ensure that your systems are safe from those viruses. Next, we have worms. Worms are also a type of malware, but unlike virus, they do not really take control of a space. But what they do is they replicate themselves. I don't know if you guys can remember, but back in the days, worms are not common these days. But back in the days, you have situations where um, maybe you have a worm on your computer in this folder and then you open another folder, you see it. Any single folder you go into, you see it. I remember back in Nigeria, there was a type of type of worm called Rila Odinga. I think it's Rila Odinga. And it was really, really popular when we were back in Nigeria. We really had to deal with that so much in early days, early 2000s. And same thing, updating updated antiviruses tackle worms as well. Trojan horses are also a type of malware, but unlike virus and worms, they are actually piece of software by themselves that are meant to do a certain thing. Now, a lot of the times, Trojan horses tend to hide behind a certain software, and what they do is maybe they present hackers or whoever the originator is creates a certain software and present it as a software that is meant to do a certain thing, but behind the scene it is doing something. An example would be maybe just going on your mobile phone and downloading an application like maybe a mobile touch or maybe a touchlight that is just meant to turn on your flashlight. But then by running that touchlight, all of a sudden you see like, oh, it wants access to your contacts. So if what does a touchlight have anything to do with your contacts? So things like that could be a Trojan horse, and it could be definitely it just needs legitimate access to your um touch. Sorry, to your contacts. Now, Trojan horses really do a lot of things behind the scenes. Back to the example with the application with touchlights, touchlight applications. And I'm not saying all touchlight applications are like that. It's just most of the times you find like Trojan horses are really simple applications that not really that big of a deal, but they are the ones doing really the main damage. Uh, so yeah, you download that and then maybe it will be reading all your contacts and sending it to whoever the person is, or even all your emails and sending it and deleting the email so you wouldn't even know it's been sent. And there are a lot of cases with softwares that are being released. You realize they are meant to do this. No, you get them with the intention of this, doing task A, but behind the scenes they are doing task B. Um, Apple App Store is really good with making sure like all the softwares are not Trojan horses. Um, Android not so good considering it's an open source environment, but Google Play Store are trying to change the way things are. So yeah, there is also polymorphic threat. This is not really a malicious code per se, but it's more of a behavior. Could be with a virus, worms, or even Trojan horses. But basically, what it is just the capability of a malware to evolve and to hide itself or to pretty much avoid being detected. So maybe a worm that replicates itself is being installed on a computer, but as soon as it's in the computer, it realizes, oh, he has a good antivirus that will be able to detect me, then it changes itself to do something else. Happens all the time. And these are just different types of malwares and attacks that have happened. Like we have the Stuxnet I was talking about that happened in 2010. It's a worm type of worm that was meant to target Iran's nuclear weapon. There are a lot of them. My Doom. These are all just malwares and attacks that happened, and the amount of systems it affected, as well as the financial damage that happened. Chernobyl was a known virus that happened on that resides in memory. It's usually targets BIOS, I believe. And yeah, next we are going to look into pretty much continuing on software attacks. We did look into malwares. Now we're going to look into backdoors. Backdoors are, unlike malwares, backdoors are pretty much are pretty much applications, but that have multiple entry points. So think of you have a house, you have your front door, that is the main entrance, but then because you bought the house without really building it yourself or anything, apparently the original person who owns the house, who actually built it, has some sort of a tunnel that he can go in and out of the house without you even knowing. So yes, you do have the house, but and it's your home and everything. You always use the front door and everything, but there's actually a back door, kind of like a tunnel that someone can come in and go out without you knowing. Same thing applies with applications and operating systems and all technology related things can have a back door. This has to do with trusting your provider. If you are not the one, if you have taken my IT 520 class, you will remember a paper I always say I love so much, which is Trust and Trust by Ken Thompson. But it's just talking about if you're not the one who really designed an application or wrote a software, you cannot really trust that application to do as it is expected to do, and it has no backdoors or anything. But basically, what you're doing is trusting the person who wrote the application. So if you're using Microsoft Office, you do not know if Microsoft Office doesn't have a backdoor. But what you're doing is you're trusting Microsoft to that yes, this application doesn't have any backdoors that people can access without me knowing. And a case happened with Apple recently and FBI, where with the 2015, I believe, was it 2015 or 2014, but the San Bernardino attack, Apple were able to get the phone of the person who was responsible for the attack, but he had a 4-digit PIN on the phone, and he has also configured the phone to have only 10 possible combinations, where after the 10th attempt, if it's not right, it's going to wipe the phone completely. Now, with 4 digits, we're talking about almost 999 or even more combinations. FBI were not able to get into the phone, and as a result, the FBI started requesting that Apple should start installing backdoors, um, and the key to the backdoor should only be limited to like Apple as well as FBI and all of that. That Apple should start putting backdoors in iOS so that it's accessible when there is a need. Became a huge debate within along the security community. At the end of the day, Apple never did that. Backdoors do not exist. But today, within the security community, there are people that felt like Yeah, Apple should have complied because it's a national security issue. And then there are the privacy advocates that feel like, no, that should never be in place because FBI is going to violate it, and there are trust issues between the government and its citizens and all of that. So yeah, depending on which part of the spectrum you belong to, but you can go with your own viewpoint. But the point is, we're trying to make here is that backdoors are just additional entry points within applications that are not known. Then we have farming, which is more of just a URL uh, redirect. So maybe you want to go to your bank and your bank name is mybank.com, but you go in and type mybank.com rather than going to the main bank, it goes to a fishy, illegitimate website, and then you put in your username and password, and whoever owns that illegitimate website now has your information. These are also common, and these are usually common with cyber squatting at most of the times. That is why it's never good to pretty much click on a URL link. So think of me typing, maybe your website has trying to maybe your website is book.com, book.com, and then someone going in and registering and copying your website looks exactly the same and everything, but because they cannot have book.com, they will go and write it as b0ok.com. And because the human mind is somehow sometimes, and maybe due to inattention, you receive a link and it did say B0OK, or maybe even BOOK, but under the hyperlink, it's actually B0OK.com. And without really paying attention, you click on it, you go to the illegitimate website, looks exactly like your own website without you paying real attention to like the certificates and all of that. And you end up putting your username and password, and instantly they redirect you back to your main website, so you do not even know that it has happened, and chances are all you'll see is like, ah, your password didn't work, maybe you should try again, and things like that. But now they have your username and password. That's farming. We have man in the middle, and now that we are slowly becoming pretty much gender neutral society, it's been called middle person attack. But basically, what it is if point A wants to send point B a message, there will be someone in the middle listening and maybe getting access to the message. So let's say you are trying to, point A is trying to send maybe point B a message, then additional maybe X will be right in the middle and will collect the message from point A and pass it on to point B. But now point A knows everything about the communication that is meant to happen. That is a form of attack called man in the middle. So think of post office. You want to send something from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, your friend who is in Atlanta, you give it to post office, but rather than post office just taking it directly as the communication medium, someone maybe UPS somehow ended up with the package and they kind of deliver it to your friend. I mean, the package has been delivered to whoever is in Atlanta, but at the end of the day, UPS got access to it. That is also a form of attack that could happen by finding a vulnerability in the communication path or communication medium. We also have packet sniffing, which is a form of attack that if you have taken my networking class, which is a prerequisite for this class, you know of Wireshark. Packet sniffing has to do more with monitoring data as it travel along a communication medium. And then there is IP spoofing, which is pretty much gaining access to a network or whatsoever, a site or anything by masking and copying the other person's IP address. An example would be you have your house, you have your key, but then someone goes and copy a key while you're sleeping or whatsoever, or maybe when you're trying to open it, they try to copy your key, or they even put some sort of a thing inside your lock such that when you put the key, it automatically copies it, and then they remove it and then go and do another key for themselves. That is similar to IP spoofing, where people just mask the origination IP to look like it's coming from a legitimate source. And firewalls or routers or whatever control network control mechanism is in place that is meant to authenticate and verify the IP address will be able to do so, because what the hacker did is actually modify the IP address to look like it's coming from a reliable source. We then have still on the software attacks, we have denial of service attacks, which has more to do with floating flooding the target system. We have denial of service attacks, which involve just an attacker leveraging or implementing the attack using one system. And then we have distributed, where it includes multiple systems. But what happens here is the attacker just target a computer or a system or whatsoever, and it floats it with requests. There are different types of DDoS attacks, but they flood it with a lot of information such that a legitimate person trying to access it will not be able to access it. So think of it from maybe you have a single door that is meant to accommodate three people at once, but then 10 people try to go through that door and they all get stuck and the door is non-functioning, and then the real owner who has authorization to go through that door cannot pass through. That is what happens with distributed denial of service attack. In last year, GitHub, the repository site, got attacked with around 1.35 terabits per second. Now, each single website has a maximum, what we call concurrent users, a maximum maximum amount of users it can handle at once. And once that amount is reached, the sites will become uh, pretty much unavailable, or it goes down, or it crashes, such that legitimate users who have legitimate reasons to access cannot access it. That is a form of attack. Anonymous is well known for doing that. Then we have mail bombing, which is also a form of distributed denial of service attacks, where you constantly keep getting a lot of emails coming in all at once, such that you will not even you such that you miss an important email that is meant to come straight to you. We also have spams. I believe we all know email spams, where you just keep getting random emails. They're also a form of attack, and it's really annoying, but it's also a form of nuisance attack. Well, it's more of a nuisance than it is an attack, because it doesn't really stops you, but it can get really annoying to receive those. We also have text-based text messaging form of DDoS attacks, where I believe there are websites where you can go and just put a phone number and then they keep getting text message, text message, text message. I could remember when I first started one of my early jobs, one of my senior was playing with me and he keeps sending me a picture of goats. Oh, it's really funny at the time, but I wouldn't want that today. There are also this is not really a DDoS attacks, but recently with this season 8 of Game of Thrones, there were sites that are actually meant to just send spoilers. So if you have friends who are not really watching Game of Thrones live and you want to spoil it for them, you just go there and put their numbers, and then they will start getting text message of the spoilers as it happens. So these are all form of software attacks that are in place. We also have what we refer to as the deadly, sorry, what we refer to as the technical hardware and software failures, pretty much. The technical hardware has to do with system and degradation. So your hardware appliances, like your computer, becomes obsolete, becomes really old. Um, you can it can't function as it is meant to function because it's really old. Think of or maybe the design was not really good. It hasn't been tested well, so it fails. Um, Something like Samsung's, the way they keep exploding their battery at some point, or even the Samsung Fold, how it wasn't really fully tested. And as soon as consumers started using it, it kept failing. it kept on failing. Now, also regarding hardware failures could be when the device is really old and you need to upgrade it. Certain products are definitely known to have a very high quality in terms of hardware, very good quality, as well as certain products are just low quality. Means maybe they weren't attention weren't paid enough on the other ones, or just a design quality issue. Um, there are also different grades for testing hardware. So definitely a military grade testing is definitely completely different with a regular consumer testing. So even laptops that are meant for military and mission specific to go out, laptops that are being used in fields are completely, their durability is completely different with regular consumers um, laptops. So that all has to do with software failures as well as them being prone to errors as well as failures. We have what we refer to as mean time between failure, and then it's a measure of the amount of time between hardware failures. We are going to go more in depth on that under the subsequent chapters. I mean, at the end of the day, getting a product early uh, into the market does not really translate to durability. Depending on which side of the aisle you belong, some are more for let's bring the technology, let's be the first to bring out the technology, even if it's not going to function properly, and some are um, more on the side of yeah, let's wait till everything is really good and durable and less buggy before we release it. Think of it from a Samsung and Apple kind of viewpoint where Apple is really slow in terms of coming up with things, but when they come out with it, it's stable, and Samsung can come out with all these new technologies, but immediately it fails. Then we have the technical software failures and errors. Same thing with similar thing with hardware, but this on a software viewpoint. This has more to do with writing terrible software codes, uh, as well as not paying attention to the main thing, not testing the softwares like user acceptance testing, not doing fuzzy tests, UATs, and all of that, where the software is really buggy. We have situations where maybe an example would be maybe Facebook decide to release Instagram app, but then Instagram app is really slow, it lags, and all of that. Then they will have to release an update. So that is part of like a software error and software failure. Unlike hardware that is usually dependent on the hardware itself. It relates to, as for hardware, think of just pretty much um, the physical device itself and the software basically from the application viewpoint. We have buggy softwares, we have softwares that do not function. Now we also have, there is also an organization, pretty much a kind of like a project that is dedicated. They have their website that is dedicated to ensuring we have softwares that are less buggy as well as function as they should. We call it, it's called the OWASP. That's the Open Web Application Security Project. They are pretty much dedicated to ensuring a less buggy and trustworthy software. They always publish the top security risks related to software applications and software development, and also things to pay attention to when developing a software. And these are the same things I was talking about. So when you get the chance, definitely go to OWASP website and play with it from. And if you're a software engineer, application developer, and things like that, these should definitely be in your mind. But these are just some common failures during software development. Common failures in software development and softwares could be failure to handle errors, cross-site scripting, buffer overruns. Buffer overruns has to do with overflowing buffer boundaries while writing data to memory, caching exceptions, command injections. We are going to look into these in details in the subsequent chapters when we get there. But these are pretty much things that can common software failures that happens. And then we have the areas that needs to be Developers need to pay attention to when writing softwares as well as application, things from trusted network address resolution, um, also unauthenticated key exchange, as well as URLs, like we mentioned earlier. Key exchange is more from a cryptographic viewpoint. If you remember when, sorry, if you took my networking class or you took the cryptography class, you should know about asynchronous encryption algorithms that require key exchange and things like that. So there has to be some sort of authentication mechanisms to ensure reliable key exchange. We also need to pay attention to weak passwords as well as poor usability. There are a lot of considerations and problem areas, and application and software developers should definitely pay attention to that. So number 11, we have the outdated technology. Could be from a hardware and a software viewpoint. Think of today trying to use iPhone 4 with the current version of iOS. Definitely it's going to be slow, it's going to be lag, it's going to lag. Same thing applies for organizations trying to use an outdated server or infrastructures to support current needs, and newer applications will definitely result in slow, um, as well as less functionalities, as well as inability to execute as and function as the organization should. This also used to technology, outdated infrastructure and technology plays a huge role in IT. The need for updates between hardware and software is always a constant thing. And the major places where we see issues with outdated technology has to do with proper lack of proper managerial planning. So if there are no attentions to life cycles for hardware as well as softwares, and need for constant updates and maybe changing the entire hardware, it is not all the time that you should upgrade your RAM. There are instances where maybe the computer can no longer support a higher RAM, so you might have to change the entire infrastructure. You have an outdated motherboard and processor, you might need to change that, updating your um, hard drives to SSD and things like that. The 12th one and the last one is actually theft, which is a common thing. Actually, one of the most common thing that usually happens in workplace, and it's also one of the easiest one to um, fix when as it relates to hardware. Kind of really easy to put physical hardware controls as it relates to theft. But when it comes to data and transferring electronic data, there are multiple ways that can happen. We have seen situations where employees install their personal drop cloud and clouds like Dropbox, Google Drive, and everything, and they are transferring company files into that storage, or maybe the company uses same cloud environments and employee download it and use their um, access credentials on their personal laptops to access basically their personal devices to access company information. Sometimes they use a thumb drive. There are control mechanisms in place, especially with data and like USBs, things like DLPs, that's data loss preventions and things like that. But it's really always hard to tackle that because there are multiple entry and exit points in systems that employees can gain access. That's the same reason why for really national security systems that the data it's really highly important and valuable. You find the systems are completely disconnected from the internet. um, they are also stored in rooms like skiff, and the room have no internet connection, or at least no communication with outside world, and whoever has the clearance to go into those rooms cannot go with their maybe phones, no technological and recording devices, only their eyes, No smart glasses, no smart watch, nothing that can record a device can actually go into SCIF. So these are all pretty much controls relating to data theft as well as hardware theft. And we also have controls for intellectual property theft. And this brings us to the end of chapter two. And we were able to cover and understand the needs for information security by organizations, as well as the important functions information security performs to an organization. Pretty much covered all the four. How protecting organizations' ability to function also is an information security thing, as well as information security has to do with enabling safe operation of applications, and that pretty much drive the organization's needs, as well as that are meant to facilitate and enable the organizations to achieve their goal. We also looked into information security's usage towards protecting data, organization data, as well as safeguarding the technology assets. We also went over the threats and dangers facing organizations, people, and how those can be compromised. We didn't go into the control mechanisms, which we will in subsequent chapters, but we did touch a little bit on how most of these threats can be handled. Now, we also look into pretty much intellectual property and everything. Next chapter, we are going to look into, in chapter three, we are going to look into laws and legal boundaries, as well as legal bodies that exist, and how some of these things are considered legal and illegal, and how pretty much regions as well as different country laws tend to affect threats as well as information security. And an example would be how intellectual property is not really considered a big deal in places like China, but then we also have places like the UK, where they have their own data protection laws in place, like GDPR, which requires complete and different ways of doing things than the US. So we are going to look into that. We'll also look into, as it relates to maybe intellectual property, how DMCA, that is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, is in place and meant to pretty much is like an American contribution towards intellectual property to reduce the impact of copyright, trademarks, and privacy infringements. We are also Australian and computer security laws. We're going to look into like the ethics and all of that in chapter three. Thank you very much, and see. I'll go over chapter three with you guys next.